They walk into the room like gods, shoulders high, eyes sharp, voices confident. Narcissists know how to command attention, to wrap people in their charisma, to convince the world they are untouchable. But what the world doesn't see is what lies beneath that golden surface. It's not strength, it's not power, it's glass. Beneath the arrogance and the control is a fragile, fractured ego desperate to be worshipped, terrified of being seen for what it really is. Empty. Narcissists don't build inner confidence, they build illusions. They create castles made of glass and paint them gold, hoping no one sees the cracks. Their self-worth isn't rooted in truth. It's dependent on how many people applaud the performance. That's why they fear silence. That's why they panic when they can't read you. Because when you don't react, you hold up a mirror and they're forced to look into it. And what they see terrifies them. The world teaches us to confront power head-on. But when dealing with a narcissist, the real power is in restraint. The more you challenge them directly, the more energy you feed their delusion. But the moment you stop playing the game, the moment you stop explaining, defending, and reacting, you shatter the illusion. They may look indestructible, but their entire identity is stitched together with external validation. Remove the admiration, and the whole thing collapses. That's why their anger isn't rooted in strength. It's rooted in fear. Fear of being irrelevant, fear of not being in control, and most of all, fear that someone finally sees through them. When you step back and detach, you don't just walk away. You dismantle the fantasy they depend on. You reveal what they've spent their lives hiding. And in that stillness, in that silence, their golden image begins to crack. Not because you broke it, but because it was never whole to begin with. That's the cruel truth about narcissists. They pretend to be steel, but underneath it all, they're just glass, polished, painted, and painfully easy to break once you stop being afraid of the shine. We've been conditioned to believe that power is loud, that it shows up in arguments, declarations, and emotional outbursts. But true power, especially when facing a narcissist, is far more subtle. It's silence, strategic, deliberate, surgical silence. Because narcissists feed on your reaction. Every protest, every defense, every raised voice is oxygen to their ego. It tells them they still own space in your mind, that they still hold influence over your emotions. So when you stop reacting, when you go emotionally silent, you do something far more powerful than fight. You suffocate the fantasy they're trying to maintain. Narcissists don't understand peace. They interpret calm as contempt. But what they fear most isn't your anger. It's your stillness. Because silence doesn't just strip away their control, it forces them to confront the emptiness inside themselves. And that's a battle they're not built to face. You don't need to outtalk a narcissist. You don't need to convince, explain, or expose them. Let them speak. Let them lie. Let them build their tower of ego higher and higher. Your silence will become the wind that eventually knocks it down. Not because you're weak, but because you've mastered restraint. This is psychological warfare, not waged with rage, but with indifference. Not with confrontation, but with poise. Each time you choose not to respond, not to defend yourself, you reclaim a piece of your power. And that unnerves them more than any insult ever could. They will push, they will bait, they will weaponize words, twist stories, and throw emotional grenades. But when you remain calm, when you offer no emotional fuel, they begin to unravel, publicly, painfully, and predictably. Silence is not passive, it's calculated, it's disciplined, and when used with intent, it becomes the sharpest blade you possess. Because the narcissist expects fire. But when you give them ice, when you give them stillness, you change the rules of the game. And that's when you begin to win, not by shouting, but by refusing to play. That's not avoidance. That's strategy. That's power. A narcissist doesn't just crave attention, they depend on it. It's their fuel, their fix, their false lifeline. While most people seek connection, love, or mutual respect, the narcissist seeks only one thing: worship. They want to be adored, feared, envied, but never truly known. Because deep down, they fear that if anyone saw the truth, the insecurity, the hollowness, the desperation, they'd never be admired again. And so they build a life not of substance, but of spectacle. Every compliment is a drug hit. Every admirer is a mirror reflecting the fantasy they've carefully curated. This isn't love, it's illusion management. They don't want a partner, they want a follower. They don't want your heart, they want your submission. And the moment you stop applauding, the moment you stop validating their every move, the panic begins. Because to a narcissist, being ignored feels like death. Relevance is everything. Attention is their identity. Remove it, and you remove them. That's why strategic silence is more than a tactic. It's a weapon. When you go emotionally dark, when you withdraw your reactions, you're not just retreating, you're revoking their very sense of existence, and they'll do anything to get it back. They'll bait you with flattery. They'll attack you with insults. They'll swing between guilt and seduction with stunning precision. But it's not about you, it's about regaining control, because narcissists are addicts. Their drug is your attention, and they'll lie, manipulate, or betray just to keep you looking at them. That's why the real breakthrough doesn't happen when you shout back. It happens when you stop looking, when you stop playing the audience to their performance, when you let them scream into a void that no longer echoes. That silence doesn't just deny them attention. It exposes how empty they truly are without it. And that is the one thing they can't tolerate, being unseen. Because when no one is watching, the illusion fades. And what remains isn't a god, it's a ghost. A loud, desperate ghost who no longer knows who they are without applause. That's their tragedy. But it can be your freedom. The narcissist's greatest illusion is that they control you. But what they never anticipate, what they have no defense against, is your emotional invisibility. When you stop reacting, stop defending, stop giving them the emotional high they crave, you starve them. Not physically, not even verbally, emotionally. And this kind of starvation is lethal to their identity. They are addicts disguised as leaders, addicted to your anger, your validation, your tears, your attention. When you become emotionally invisible, you remove every lever they've been pulling. They push your buttons, but nothing happens. They throw bait, but you don't bite. And slowly their performance begins to collapse, not because you attacked, but because you vanished. This is not passivity. This is warfare with clean hands. The less you give, the more they crave. The more they crave, the more reckless they become. And in that desperation, they expose themselves. That's the brilliance of the starvation strategy. You don't meet them with fire. You meet them with stillness. They scream to provoke Kate. You give them quiet. They want a reaction. You offer detachment. Narcissists see love as a mirror, not a connection. And when that mirror refuses to reflect, they spiral, because they don't know who they are without someone reacting to them. You must become unreadable, calm, neutral, impenetrable. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. Every reaction is a gift. Every explanation is a thread they pull to unravel your sanity. But when there is nothing to read, no expression to decode, no reaction to exploit, they lose all sense of control. That's when you reclaim your power, not with confrontation, but with disappearance. And in that absence, something radical happens. You begin to heal. You see clearly. You stop existing as their supply and start existing for yourself. To starve a narcissist emotionally is not just to defeat them, it is to rediscover your own strength. And that is the beginning of your freedom. The greatest mistake people make when dealing with narcissists is thinking they can win through confrontation. But narcissist historians don't play fair. They don't fight for truth. They fight for control, over the conversation, the perception, and most importantly, the story. That's why the more you argue, the more you lose. Because every time you try to explain yourself, defend your integrity, or expose their lies, you're playing inside their narrative, a script they wrote with only one ending. They win. But the real power isn't in confronting them. It's in rewriting the story silently, strategically, behind the scenes. You don't need to convince them or the world of who they are. Let them keep talking. Let them lie louder. All the while you're observing, calculating, waiting. Because control isn't about volume, it's about subtlety. When you stop engaging in their chaos and start controlling your own responses, you take back the pen. You no longer react, you redirect. You plant small seeds of doubt in the minds of others, ask quiet questions that make people pause. You don't expose the narcissist all at once. You dismantle the illusion piece by piece. And the beauty of this approach is that narcissists, in their arrogance, will help you. Give them a stage and they'll brag. Let them believe they've fooled you and they'll reveal far more than they should. In their hunger for dominance, they expose the very cracks you need to bring the illusion down. This is psychological warfare, and your silence is not a retreat, it's a setup. You are no longer reacting to their manipulation. You are reframing the entire story. And when the moment is right, the people around them begin to notice. The narcissist feels the shift, but they don't understand it. They scramble, blame, twist the truth, but it's too late. The narrative has already changed. You didn't confront them. You simply made the truth louder than their lies, without ever raising your voice. That is control. That is strategy. That is how you win, not with fire, but with focus. One of the cruelest truths about narcissists is that they don't target the weak. They target the kind. They don't exploit flaws. They exploit empathy. The very thing that makes you human, your ability to care, to forgive, to believe in someone's potential, is what they manipulate most. They'll show you just enough vulnerability to pull you in, a crack in their armor, a childhood wound, a moment of honesty that feels real. And that's all it takes. You begin to believe there's something worth saving. You think you've discovered the person beneath the mask, but you haven't. What you've seen is a performance, a calculated moment designed to activate your compassion and keep you emotionally invested. Because once they know you care, they own you. They play the victim. They talk about being misunderstood, abandoned, betrayed by others, and suddenly you become the exception, the one who gets them, the one they need. But it's not love, it's not trust, it's a trap. The moment you try to rescue them, they tighten the leash. Your kindness becomes your cage. Your empathy becomes the script they use to control you. Every time you try to explain yourself, show them their damage, or help them heal, you're not helping. You're playing the role they cast for you, the caregiver, the fixer, the emotional sponge. To truly break free, you must stop believing you can change them. You can't. They don't want to heal. They want to manipulate. And the more you try to appeal to their better nature, the more power you give them. The only way out is to detach, not with hatred, but with clarity. You're not cruel for protecting your peace. You're not heartless for refusing to be used. Empathy is a gift, but with narcissists, it must be guarded like a weapon. Because in the wrong hands, your compassion becomes ammunition. And the moment you realize that, you stop trying to save them and start saving yourself. That's not betrayal. That's survival. The most effective traps are the ones narcissists build for themselves. And the most brilliant strategy, let them. Let them believe they've won. Let them think they've conquered you. Let them bask in the illusion of control. Because nothing blinds a narcissist faster than their own inflated ego. They crave flattery more than truth. They hunger for admiration more than connection. So give it to them, but only enough to set the stage. Nod at their delusions. Agree with their self-praise. Play the role they want to see. Not because you're weak, but because you're preparing the fall. The goal isn't to confront their lies. It's to let them stack those lies so high they can no longer balance them. You don't need to shout. You don't need to warn anyone. Just let them talk. Narcissists reveal the most when they feel most untouchable. They'll brag about manipulation, boast about control, confess their darkest strategies, all while assuming you're too naive, too loyal, or too enamored to use any of it against them. That's where your power lives, in the stillness behind your smile. Because while they're performing, you're collecting. While they're basking in admiration, you're documenting every word. Eventually, their ego outgrows reality. They take one step too far. They lie to the wrong person. They manipulate one too many times. And then it all starts to collapse. Not because you pushed, but because they weren't built to withstand the weight of their own self-deception. That's the genius of silent strategy. You didn't destroy them. You allowed them to destroy themselves. And when it's over, they'll call you cold. They'll say you betrayed them. But the truth is, they never saw you coming because they were too busy staring at their own reflection. Feeding a narcissist's ego is not surrender, it's setup. And when done right, it doesn't just remove them from power, it exposes them publicly and permanently. That's not just victory, that's vindication without chaos. That's the art of letting gravity do what pride always makes inevitable. The narcissist always wants you reactive, emotional, unbalanced. That's how they win, by pulling you into their storm so you forget your center. Every insult they hurl, every twisted story they tell, every passive-aggressive jab, it's all bait. Because the moment you defend yourself, the moment you try to correct the law or expose the truth, you're already playing their game. But power doesn't come from reacting. It comes from observing, in silence, with precision. The narcissist thrives on performance, but they are their own worst witness. If you stay quiet long enough, they reveal everything. So you listen, not to respond, but to record. You watch, not to absorb, but to learn. Their behavior isn't random. It's patterned. The way they lie, the way they blame others, the way they shift narratives to protect their image. It's a script they've used for years. And once you know it, you're no longer confused. You're no longer trapped in their emotional fog. You become a mirror that doesn't reflect what they want, but what they truly are. And that's what makes them squirm. Narcissists don't fear exposure in theory. They fear being understood, because understanding leads to prediction, and prediction leads to control. Observation gives you leverage. It gives you time. It gives you power that doesn't scream, but strikes quietly. When others are still mesmerized by their charm, you've already seen behind the curtain. And you don't need to warn the crowd. You just need to wait. Because narcissists always overreach. They always slip. And when they do, it won't be your voice that exposes them. It'll be their own behavior. The truth doesn't need defense. It just needs space to be seen. So stop trying to prove what they are. Let them do it for you. You are no longer the manipulated. You are the observer. Calm, sharp, and unshakable. That's when everything changes. Not because you fought harder, but because you learned to watch without being pulled in. That's where your power begins. Not in the noise, but in the clarity only silence can give. Narcissists don't fear losing your love. They fear losing your attention. Because love requires connection, empathy, and depth. But narcissists are incapable of true intimacy. What they crave instead is relevance, control, a constant emotional presence, even if it's built on chaos. So when you walk away physically but stay entangled emotionally, still checking, still reacting, still needing closure, you're feeding them. You've left the room, but they still live rent-free in your mind. True power begins the moment you realize this, and the moment you go silent, not just in voice, but in energy. When your absence becomes total, you don't just escape their influence, you become their undoing. To a narcissist, disappearing emotionally is the ultimate betrayal. Because without an audience, there's no stage. Without your reactions, there's no performance. You were never just a partner to them. You were a mirror, a tool to reflect the image they wanted to see. And when that mirror goes dark, they're forced to face what they've been running from their entire life, the void within. The silence you give them is louder than any argument. It doesn't just frustrate, it terrifies. Because now they are no longer admired. They are no longer in control. They are irrelevant, and irrelevance is their deepest fear. Your absence is not punishment. It's not about revenge. It's about recovery, healing, liberation. Every moment you don't respond is a message. You no longer define my worth. You no longer own my attention. And that quiet declaration hits harder than any insult ever could. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to explain. You just step back and let gravity handle what pride began. While they spiral for attention, you rise in stillness. While they chase control, you reclaim your peace. And in the echo of your absence, they're left with the only thing they truly fear, themselves. That's not just power. That's poetic justice, and it all begins when you realize that disappearing isn't defeat. It's the highest form of freedom. Real power doesn't roar. It doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't prove itself with drama or confrontation. Real power moves in silence, rooted, calm, and immovable. When you've spent time under the influence of a narcissist, your energy has been scattered, reacting to insults, explaining your intentions, defending your integrity. But the turning point comes when you no longer need to be understood. You no longer need to be believed. You no longer seek justice from the very person who distorted truth in the first place. That's when your power begins to consolidate, not through noise, but through clarity. One silent decision at a time, you begin to take your life back. You stop asking for closure. You stop trying to fix what was never real. You stop responding to manipulation disguised as apology, and in that stillness, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see. The lies become clearer. The guilt begins to dissolve. You realize their chaos was never a reflection of your inadequacy, but a mask for their own. And with that awareness, you stop fighting for the relationship and start fighting for your peace, not through retaliation, but through detachment, not by shouting your truth, but by walking away from those who will never value it. Narcissists should burn bright, but fast. Their destruction is inevitable, but it doesn't need your hands. The most Machiavellian move you can make is to outlast them, not with revenge, but with indifference. While they scream into the void for attention, you sit in silence and build something real. Your boundaries, your purpose, your healing. Let them call you cold. Let them say you changed. You didn't change. You just stopped performing. You stopped bleeding for someone who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. That's not cruelty. That's self-respect. That's power reclaimed in the quietest, most unstoppable way possible. You didn't crush them. You simply refused to carry them anymore. And that's how your story begins again. On your terms, in your voice, in your silence. In a world addicted to noise, conflict, and emotional reaction, one of the most powerful lessons we can learn is the strength of restraint. This message is not just about dealing with narcissists. It's about reclaiming your energy in a world that constantly tries to provoke it. You don't have to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You don't have to fight for validation in spaces where your truth is twisted. The real power lies in knowing when to be silent, when to step back, and when to let someone reveal who they are without your interference. Emotional invisibility isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and long-term self-respect over short-term validation. When you stop feeding toxic people your attention, you don't just protect your mental health. You reclaim control of your story. You stop being the puppet and start being the author. You don't need to expose anyone. They'll expose themselves in time. All you need to do is stay grounded, stay observant, and refuse to perform. This strategy isn't about cruelty. It's about survival. It's about learning that your silence can be a boundary. Your absence can be a message. And your detachment can be a declaration. I am no longer available for emotional games. That's not cold. That's growth. In a culture where reaction is currency, be the one who moves in silence and watch how loud your peace becomes.